Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'll be discussing The Shining and Doctor Sleep, both of course by Stephen King. And don't worry, if you haven't read either of these books, this will be a non-spoilery video, so I'm not going to be diving into any spoilers for any of these books. But what I will be doing is going over the history of these two books and going over some slight details about them, and then just my overall experience with both of these books. I've read both of these books multiple times, and at the end of the video, I'll also tag along about the movies, because both of the movies are very good. And yeah, that's what this video is going to be. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, of course, we start with The Shining, which is Stephen King's third published novel, published in 1977. And this is one of, if not his most popular book to date, still. It's one of the most well-known haunted house stories, except, of course, this is taking place at the Overlook Hotel with the Torrance family, Jack and Wendy and Danny Torrance. Jack Torrance is the father figure, and he gets a job looking after the Overlook Hotel in Colorado while, the snowstorm is going to come during the winter, and it works out perfectly because it'll give him enough time to write his new novel. And Wendy is the mother, and Danny is the son, and you guys probably have read or have heard of this book, obviously. If you haven't, you might have seen the movie. There's plenty of funny gifts from the movie. It's definitely one of his most well-known, like I said. And I won't be going into any spoilers just in case anybody hasn't read this book or doesn't already know about it. But of course, like I've said, it's one of the most well-known haunted house stories taking place at this Overlook Hotel. And it's pretty scary. It's pretty creepy. It's definitely up there. King fans definitely cite this as one of his scariest. And it can kind of, even though, like I said, it is one of his most popular books, it can kind of lean either way for fans. Some constant readers absolutely love this book. They give it 5 stars. They love the character work, and they think it is very creepy. Other people, they're not so big on it. They think that the scares don't come until like way later in the book, and they think it's more, like literary horror, which, I would argue Stephen King is at his best with literary horror. It's definitely all about the characters, and he really gets you attached to these characters, and then he does horrible things to them, and that's where his horror comes for me. And we'll talk more about the movie later, but like I said, this book came out in 1977, and the movie came out in 1980, which Stephen King was not a big fan of, by the way. It's one of my favorites, and like I said, we'll talk about that more towards the end. But anyway, almost 40 years later, in 2013, we get Doctor Sleep, which is, of course, the famous sequel to The Shining, which, who would have saw this coming, right? Like, if you read the book in 1977, you probably weren't really wondering about a sequel, but Stephen King himself said that he kind of always wondered what happened to Danny Torrance. And I guess that is a mild spoiler because, it stars Danny Torrance as an adult, so he does survive The Shining, so that's a mild spoiler. But yeah, this follows him, when he's an adult. He's also struggling with a lot of the things his father was dealing with, like alcoholism and drug use and all of that stuff. So those kind of themes are still laden in this book. And just like Danny Torrance had the ability to shine in The Shining with supernatural powers, you also get another kid who has shining-like abilities. I will say, though, that the clear difference for me with this book is the villains. In the first book, The Shining, kind of the real villain is Jack, or you could argue it's the hotel, like, looming over Jack. But this one, we kind of get, like, a roaming, like, I was going to say herd, or like a roaming group of what are essentially vampires and they feast off of uh, people who have the Shining ability, and they're pretty creepy. Although I will say that's probably my least favorite aspect of this book is that the villains themselves aren't they're not super capable, and they're not super scary. And of course, compared to the horror elements in The Shining, with all the supernatural stuff going on in the hotel, and then Jack slowly going crazy, I think the horror elements do work a bit better in The Shining, and it is a bit creepier. But also, I just think that the writing is better in this book, and this is kind of where we get to my opinion of which book do I like better, and kind of my experience with both of these books. I will say, like, the first few Stephen King books that I read were like The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon and The Eyes of the Dragon, which I did enjoy at the time, but they didn't really turn me into the constant reader that I am today. I would have to say that, back in college, when I heard of the release of Doctor Sleep, I was like, ooh, a sequel to The Shining. Well, I got to read that. So, of course, I had to pick up The Shining. Absolutely loved it. Gave it 5 stars. Was like, one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books for a very long time. And then, of course, I jumped right into the sequel. And I also really liked it, but I kind of gave it 4 stars. I think, reading this, like, just after I read this for the first time, I was like, this is 5 stars, and then this is 4 stars. But ever since then, I've reread each book a couple of times, and I will say that every time I reread it, I start to like Doctor Sleep just slightly more than The Shining. I'd say right now, The Shining is more of a 4-star book for me, and Doctor Sleep is more like a 4.5-star book. I think it's just because I was just so used to getting this story, because getting into the movies now, The Shining is my favorite horror movie of all time, and I've seen that dozens and dozens of times. Love it. And then going back, of course, and reading the book, very different. And like I said, Stephen King really did not like the movie because he made so many changes. But of course, watching it as a kid, I didn't know about any of that. So I loved watching the movie, and the book was great too. It's just very different. And then, of course, Doctor Sleep also has a movie, which I think a lot of King fans like that. They definitely like it more than the Shining movie. And it was very interesting because getting to watch that in theaters, like Mike Flanagan, who's done a bunch of King movies like these, can't remember all of them, but he did such a fantastic job where he pleased not only the Stephen King book fans, like bringing Doctor Sleep back to life, but he also pleased the King fans who love both The Shining and the Shining movie. So he just did a fantastic job. But like I've said, I've read both of these multiple times now, and every time I reread them, I just enjoy Doctor Sleep more. I think just because it's a more refreshing story. Like I've said, I've watched The Shining so many times, so going back to read the book, I already know of course I already know what's going to happen, but like kind of going through the motions, like it doesn't really like freak me out as much as it does watching the movie or even the first time I read the book. But Doctor Sleep, even though it's not scary really, I just love Stephen King's writing in this book, and just getting Danny's point of view as a grown-up now, like going through his thought processes. I think Stephen King is just a more mature writer writing this book, so I just think it flows a bit better. And I don't know, I just love reading and or listening to this book. It's so good. I know that's probably going to be unpopular. I know tons of people put this easily in their top 5 or top 10. I think for me, like I said, every time I read it, it just gets a little bit lower and lower. I will say probably objectively, The Shining is a better book just because the characters are so great, and the themes, of abuse and alcoholism and addiction, right? And just everything just works well in this book. I think for me, it's just subjectively a better experience for me reading Doctor Sleep than it is The Shining. Both are obviously Stephen King classics, and I love both the movies and the books. But I'm very curious to see what you guys think. So please comment down below, which do you like better, The Shining or Doctor Sleep, both for the book and the movie. Like I said, I love all of them. I will probably say, like, out of the four things, The Shining movie is probably my favorite. And then, you know, probably Doctor Sleep, the book, and then probably Doctor Sleep, the movie. And then The Shining book is, I mean, they're all great. So don't come at me too hard here. But yeah, just let me know what you guys think about this. Am I crazy, or do y'all agree with me? Please let me know down in the comments below. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and subscribe to the Bookish Drummer Discord. I'll have a link for that down below. I also have a Patreon if you want to go support me there. And an Amazon wishlist. I don't need more books, but it's there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.